Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Lance Thompson, Global Minded's board chair, and most recently, the Executive Vice President, CFO, and Chief Strategy Officer for Clark Atlanta University, based here in Atlanta. I am pleased to introduce this month's Higher Education Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable event. Our theme for this month is, what is Hispanic Heritage Month? And what does it mean for equity, justice, opportunity, and culture? If you are unfamiliar with the work that Global Minded does, but what we do is we create a capable, diverse talent pipeline by getting more women, first-gen to college, and poverty-affected students into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline by connecting them to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. We do this through our monthly equity events like today's event, as well as events that we have in K-12, STEM, tech, and health areas, through our daily newsletters that feature stories of heroes who have beaten the odds, and through college programs at HBCUs, HSIs, and tribal colleges. You can find out more about Global Minded on our website, which will be put into the chat, but it's at www.globalminded.org. Also, I want to take a minute to preview an upcoming event that we have on November 4th. We will hold our first satellite event at Georgia Tech and the Global Minded Higher Education, STEM, and Business Leaders. Please see our flyer that's up on the screen now. We hope you and your colleagues can join us to meet these esteemed luminaries in person. And if you can't come in person, we are fortunate to have WABE, the PBS affiliate in Atlanta, live stream the event anywhere in the country. We will send you the information afterwards via email, along with the link to today's session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel leader today, Dr. Ryan Ross. He is Associate Vice Chancellor, Student Affairs, Equity and Inclusion for the Colorado Community College System. An educator, speaker, and actualization coach, Dr. Ross is committed to access, equity, and development of leaders. After 14 years of educational work, he transitioned from executive leadership at the Community College of Denver to become regional manager for mobilization for the American Petroleum Institute, focusing on STEM awareness and students and building workforce opportunities in the energy industry for women, minorities, and veterans. Dr. Ross is also the CEO of Urban Leadership Foundation of Colorado and an Aspen Fellow. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Ross as the moderator for this panel.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It is good to be back with you. It's been a few months, but as you know, we jump into our Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable series in the fall and spring semesters. And so I'm really excited to do that. Before we move any forward though, I just like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of the lands that we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. And I also acknowledge the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants who worked on this stolen land for the colonists and who continue to disproportionately face economic oppression, racism, violence, and exploitation. And so with that being said, I also encourage you to, wherever you are, from wherever you're watching, check out Native Land, the website, figure out the land that you're on and pay tribute to the first peoples of our country. That's really important. But as you know, we only have about an hour, and so we're going to jump right in. I'm super excited to have a tremendous panel of educators, community leaders, activists, brothers, sisters, parents, uncles, all of the above, and just a tremendous group of people who I admire and respect. I'm going to briefly introduce them by name and title, and then they'll further introduce themselves when we jump into our conversation today as we dive into Hispanic Heritage Month. And so first up, I'd like to introduce Rachel Garcia, who's the CEO of Collectiva. Then we have Mariana Del Rio, who is the Executive Director of Revision, Dr. Roberto Montoya, who is the Chief Equity Officer at the Colorado Department of Education, and my partner in crime when it comes to this work a lot of times. So thank you for being here. Crestina Martinez, who is the Long-Term Recovery and Major Initiative Director for Adams County government. And so with that being said, we're going to jump right in, and with the introduction from our panel members, I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves, what's their why, and who they are beyond their titles. And we're going to pick on Mariana to get started.
Was that because I picked on you pronouncing my name?
Yep.
It was close. It was close.
Well,
no, listen, I tell people you need to be fluent in Spanish to be able to pronounce my name. So it was good. It was solid.
I really tried to roll my R, but I'm still a work in progress.
I appreciate it. Thank you. No, my name is Mariana del Hierro. And beyond our professional titles, I am a fronteriza who grew up in both the US and Mexico. I am a mother, a womanist, and a mujerista. And your question to us was, what is our why? For me, it's very much embedded in my genes. I feel my why, and that is creating new systems in order to influence systemic change. And I have this kind of, if you build it, they will come mindset, and that is very much informed by how I was raised. So I grew up in an all-immigrant, female-led neighborhood. And even though most of our parents were new to this country, there was nothing that this group of women that I grew up with could not figure out on their own. And so what they did is they created this type of neighborhood ecosystem of survival. And so each of them, it was really beautiful because each of them tapped into their individual strengths that they brought to this country and to this community. For example, one of them was a nurse in Mexico. So her job was to vaccinate all the kids in the neighborhood. Another one spoke English, so her job was to translate the mail with official documents. Another one had a car, so her job was to drive us all to the WIC pickups. And so I was raised with that scrappy mindset, and that's the type of mindset that I then bring into my professional realm. And so many times for me, I found that you need to demonstrate to folks that there is another way of doing things and not waiting for others to create those systems or those processes for you. And so for me, that's where my why is creating these new systems in order for folks to then see that another world is possible, another way is possible, for them to then commit to creating the deeper change with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's awesome, especially just emphasizing the village and how you stand on their shoulders and that DNA is in you. So thank you so much. Let's go to Rachel.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Garcia, and I am the CEO of Colectiva, Dr. Ross. I think you said Colectiva. It's okay. It happens. But since we're correcting each other.
It's done out of love.
No, I love it. I love it. So I'm the CEO of Colectiva, and we're a collective of creatives, Latinx creatives here in the Denver area. And we create culturally inspired experiences to elevate and promote Latinx creatives via culture, art, and cuisine. So we work with a lot of chefs, a lot of artists, performing and visual, and writers, all just creatives of all kinds. And my why is definitely my daughter. She's 7, and I want her to grow up with pride in her cultural heritage, which is something I didn't necessarily get to grow up with until I was about 15. I didn't even get to be around other Latinos very often unless it was family. And so it's something that I really want to instill in her. So she's learning Spanish, she's dancing ballet folklorico, Mexican ballet folklorico, and doing all the things that I didn't get to do. And so she's my why. But the other part of my why I do the things that I do in nonprofit is because I really want to be somebody that impacts change, and that I love to see my culture spark joy in people. And so watching somebody see their very first ballet folklorico performance, or watching somebody see a muralist do their thing that's like a calavera or something like that, to me, that is so amazing. And it reminds me of the first time I felt that joy and the first time that I felt like I fit in somewhere. And so that's why I do what I do.
Nice. Dr. Montoya.
Hola, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. I'm Roberto Montoya. I use he, him, el pronouns, and I have the honor to serve as the first ever Chief Educational Equity Officer for the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And it's an honor to be on this panel with such amazing colegas, all folks who I consider deep femtors, who I have the honor of working with and learning from. And so it's truly humbling to be here with this familia. My why, for me, so much is connected to, I think that the struggle is my inheritance, that my people have been fighting for their existence for a millennia here, and I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm proud to say that I was raised by both Pachucos and academics. And so I'm an amalgamation of both of those things, and I'm unapologetic about that. But similar to what Rachel said, my children are my North Star. I have a daughter who's a senior up at CU Boulder and sons who are 9 and 7 in elementary school. But in addition to my children, it's also mi familia y mi gente that drives me every day. And I work every day. I say this a lot, that every day when I wake up, I sit in grace and gratitude and in breath. But the moment my feet touch the ground, it's puro ganas. Let's go. Let's do this work. And I work tirelessly to ensure that the state of Colorado has the courage of its stated convictions. We love to talk about equity. We're not always about it. So I'm here to be about it.
Right on. And last but not least, Crestina.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. I'm Crestina Martinez, and born and raised in Southern Colorado in the San Luis Valley. And that really is what drives me to do the work that I do on a day-to-day basis. I actually find myself in a time of professional transition since the last time we were all together. And I think it's just a reminder that life gives you twists and turns in ways that you don't always expect. But growing up where I did, we were a historically underserved community, but never knew that. We were rich in family, rich in love, rich in heritage, rich in just this community belief in one another, and this love and familiarity that I've never really been able to find anywhere else except in the Valley. And so I'm a public servant, I'm a rancher, I'm a daughter, I'm a Latina, a statistical exception for my community. And at the end of the day, I'm really just a small town girl trying to make a difference in this world and leave my fingerprints for generations to come in the spaces and places that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. I am the daughter of working parents. I'm the first to graduate from college. And so in so many ways, much of my life journey has been new and different than so many of my friends and family. And so I'm hoping that I can bring others along this journey and that they can do even better than I can in the future.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. I think so many times when we have the opportunity to say hello or give an introduction, we're so surface level, just name and title. We don't dig deep and share and have that little moment of vulnerability to just share who we are as people, to make just one more connection or a deeper connection that allows us to really understand narrative and make the connections necessary that we need to just move all this work forward in our community. So I just appreciate you guys so much. But so we're here to talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, and there's some folks who are tuning in now or who will tune in later to watch this on YouTube, and they don't know what it is, or maybe they've recently been associated with it by work or through an event like this, or maybe they're deeply rooted and have an understanding. But I just want to talk a little bit about, from your perspectives, what is Hispanic Heritage Month and what does it mean to you, understanding that the experience isn't necessarily monolithic. And I'm gonna just let you jump in. Who wants to jump in and go?
I'm like, who wants to break down the term Hispanic? I'm not
Right.
pointing at
Gonna
Roberto,
jump to that.
but I'm just saying.
Let's
know,
let's ask who identifies as Hispanic on this call. None of us. Yeah.
You know, and so, you know what, that's a good pin, right? Because one of the things that I want to ask you, we're going to shift it up a little bit, right? Because one of the things in the Black community, there's definitely conversation about being Black, being African-American, being African. What do you identify as? And there's not necessarily a lot of agreement. Some of it depends on kind of how, you know, age, part of the country that you're from, how in touch you are with different culture or whatever the case may be, but there's not agreement. And then sometimes it can be harmful and traumatizing. And so it feels like, as an outsider looking in to your community, that same kind of challenge is there, right? Whether we're talking about Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Chicano, right? So let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. Let's just dive in. Like, why don't you identify Hispanic, and what do you identify as, and what do people need to know about this part of the conversation?
Yeah, that was the question that I had, that I answered with the follow-up question, Ryan. Yeah,
Yeah.
because my follow-up question was, how much time do you have? Because this is a long conversation.
You know what? Hey, if this is what we're here for today, if this is the smoke that has to happen, let's get with it.
Yeah, no, I say everyone else get off mute so we could just jump in.
Yeah, let's have it.
Yes, ma'am.
Who identifies as what? I identify as fronteriza.
I identify as Chicano.
Mhm,
I identify as Latina.
mhm.
Identify as Latina and also Mexican, but if you ask somebody from Mexico if I'm Mexican, they say no. So
Yep. Mhm.
And,
So-
and
Oh, go
And
ahead.
I also identify as Coloradan. You know, my family has been in what is presently known as Colorado for generations, long before we were a state, long before the United States was a nation. And so, you know, my experience is a little different in that this is the only place my family has ever known as home, although it has been called by different names over the centuries. But I think, you know, I grew up with my family using my dad's side of the family using the term Spanish. I'm very proud of our Spanish heritage. On my mom's side, though, my great grandfather was Tarahumara from Mexico, but he came to this country and cut off all ties with his family. So culturally, I never had a connection with that part of my lineage. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I grew up using the term Hispanic because that's what was imposed on me. And as I grew and learned and better understood who I am, I felt like the term Latina was more encompassing of the different pieces of who I am, the different branches of my tree.
yeah, similarly for me, I grew up in New Mexico, in northern New Mexico, which is a bit distinct because of many folks there have an Hispano identity, which is kind of a sometimes false claim to whiteness and European ancestry as a way and a move away from and a promotion of anti-indigeneity. But many of us, similar to Crestina, my father's family is from northern New Mexico, but my grandmother was Pascuayaqui from southern New Mexico and from eastern Arizona, and her brothers were sent to Native American boarding schools in Kansas in order to basically eradicate any of their culture from them, and then came back to New Mexico incredibly damaged and harmed, as you can imagine. And so we grew up with this tension of knowing that our grandmother and her family had tribal affiliation, but yet had to kind of remove that from themselves. But you know, the term Hispanic is something I don't identify with because it was made up, you know, for a census count in order to figure out how to count a bunch of Spanish-speaking people. So it has a relation to language, where Latina or Latino, Latinx, Latine refers to geography, a particular way in which we see people from a geographical standpoint, which can include Brazil and folks who speak Portuguese and other areas within that. And again, these are terms that are used to capture, Ryan, as you said, a very diverse people that is not a monolith, that is not easily grouped together, but shares often, stories and testimonios of being othered and being excluded and being, having certain ideologies and cultures tattooed upon us, but also being very multicultural. So it's a very unique thing to be in this conversation and to see the tremendous amount of tension that exists in simple nomenclature, right? And I think it was our good friend and homie Bobby Lefebvre had a beautiful poem recently, when he was talking about the different ways in which we call each other, and he just said, "I'm cool with it." I think everyone has their own relationship to how they choose to be identified, and it's not my place to tattoo that on anyone. But I have a particular way in which I identify, mostly because of how I grew up. I grew up around activists. I grew up around people who were a part of the Chicano movement and who were on college campuses trying to push back. And so trying to reclaim a certain aspect of culture. But I know that that's not a term that everyone uses as well, that has its own problems. And so this is very complicated and I'm with it, but a lot of people want to not have this conversation and want to have and look to lowest common denominators because they're lazy and they don't want to do the necessary work to get to know the multidimensionality and individuality of us as a people. And so it's complicated and it's necessary.
I agree. I think that for me, I actually I don't identify as Hispanic because I find it a little bit offensive because it was something that was just placed upon us to perpetuate the monolith that people see us as. And I also feel like it's used a lot by deniers of our culture. So people that want to erase us will, whether they want to erase their own culture, their own identity, they use that, or people who are outsiders looking in and want to have us go away, they will just call us Hispanic because it's what they've learned. I identify as Latina because, as Crestina said, it just feels more authentic to who I am. And my grandparents were migrant farm workers who came from Texas and Mexico to places like Ohio and Nebraska and Colorado, where we were considered dirty, lazy, all of the terrible stereotypes that we've heard about ourselves were the stereotypes that were placed upon my ancestors. And so to reclaim the beauty of who we are as people, I reject that term that was placed upon us in those times, in the 60s and 70s in the 70s and 80s, to make the census flow the way the government wanted it to.
I think that there's also a sense of empowerment when it comes to deciding what word or words you feel most comfortable and that best represent you, your heritage, and where you're at. I think that there's a constant evolution of language. There's a constant evolution as individuals of where we better understand who we are, and the sense of empowerment when you are then able to determine what phraseology best represents who I am in this moment of time. And so, today I'm a Latina. I don't know 5 years from now if I may use another term, but that is the term that I feel most comfortable using today.
And adding to that piece, there is, I think we touched on the geographical, we touched on our personal histories and lineage, but there's also the experience of our Latinx, Latina, Chicana, Hispanic experience in the US and being able to find a term that best fits our experiences. And in my example, for me, the fronteriza term is more close to my personal experience in the US. I not only grew up in the border, but I also grew up going back and forth each year from the US and Mexico, and very much tapping into Ansaldúa and borderlands and that third space where, for me, I'm very comfortable with existing in those two worlds because that was my experience growing up. And for other folks, they didn't have that experience, but they had a very unique Chicano, as Roberto mentioned, or Latina or Latinx experience within the US. Or we break it down further where folks say, I'm Dominicano or I am Cubano or whatever that may be, but that is their particular experience.
And if I can add something onto this, because I agree with all of what my amazing colleagues have said so far. But what's really, I think, unique and creates tension around this as well is that we're not considered a racial identity in this country, even though race is a social construct, it's completely made up. but yet we don't get to claim a racial identity. And many of us, I can't answer for my colleagues, but I would assume that in filling out forms, they've been in that area where you look at race, it says white, Native, Black, and then it says other. We're not there. And so we have to then move on to an ethnicity. I already feel othered. I don't want to have to click that box in a way that doesn't even allow me to recognize that. And the resistance to understand that that we have been racialized, even though we don't have a racial claim in many structures. And some of that was changing, and there was an attempt to change that during the Obama administration that was rolled back during the Trump administration. Yet it's a social construct is made up. So how do we not get a chance to engage in that? And there's many of us who want to engage in a very meaningful and perverse race conversation, because there are times when we feel like we're not a part of that conversation because we see what's called the Black-white binary in terms of talking about that, and our adjacency to whiteness complexifies that. And in terms of anti-Blackness that exists in our community, many folks where I come from in northern New Mexico claim a white identity. And so it's a very unique area. And yet it's something that's not talked about enough in our experience in terms of race, racism, and white supremacy.
Oh, Roberto, that's beautiful. That the whole mestizaje process deracialized us. No, sorry, Cristina, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's really a direct correlation to resources. I mean, that is what the census form is used for. It is for dollars invested in community based on need and based on people. And so there historically was it was a way for the government to erase this from the distribution formulas and dilute the impact and presence that our community has within those government funding conversations. And so, this at the end of the day is all about money. And this was the easiest way for them to, prevent our community from receiving the recognition from our numbers, as well as the investment that our communities need in order to be able to grow, succeed, and thrive.
And the gross undercounting that happens as a result of, even threatening citizen questions on the census, and all these strategies that continue to happen, that continue to divest from our communities and undercount, our impact here. So, Cristina, thank you so much for naming that.
Thank you. I mean, this is so good. This is so rich. Thank you. And this is such an important conversation. When I think about the term Hispanic, or when I think about the term Black, both terms I don't like. And for me, it's very basic, right? You open the atlas, you get an encyclopedia, you look at a globe, you spin it around. I don't see Black on there. I don't see Hispanic on there. I don't see it. So why should I subscribe? Why should people who I care for or love subscribe to these terms? But that being said, though, we've got Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's supposed to be a celebration, right? And that's got to be complex. So how do you show up in that, right? How do you say, okay, hey, I've got to honor my identity, but here's also this opportunity to educate, celebrate. It's from the 15th to the 15th, not even from the 1st to the 30th. What do you do with all of this? What do you do with all of this? And what do you tell people who are trying to figure it out?
Well, we rename it. Latinx or whatever else. Heritage Month. If that's what we do. And I agree with everybody, what they said. It's really an individualized thing, right? We can all identify the way we want to identify on whatever scale that is. It doesn't have to just be about, race or ethnicity or anything like that. So, but yeah, so that's what I do when someone invites me to a Hispanic Heritage Month, whatever. I still attend. I still recognize that is supposed to be a good thing for us, and it's a way to elevate us and celebrate our accomplishments and our contributions. So it's needed because of what Cristina just said. It's something that I'm always surprised when somebody hasn't heard of the Heritage Month celebrations, because I'm like, really? But I believe it, that because there are people who have told me they haven't heard. I don't know, Roberto, Cristina, Mariana, what do you guys think?
For me, I have dissonance around Heritage Months, because for me, every month is our Gentes Heritage Month. I
Yes.
grew up in a place where we're thankfully that our culturas were celebrated a lot, but I also recognize that not every place was similar to how I grew up, and that our histories and our epistemologies, our ways of knowing have not always been taught in curriculum. And so there's a necessity for us to force people in some ways to lean in during a particular month to histories that have been erased, silenced, or marginalized. And so I also take advantage of this opportunity for us to talk about things that normally would not necessarily be talked about or taught. And a good example would be, I was, deeply connected to the civil rights movement, and had learned in my history classes about Brown v. Board. I never learned about Mendez versus Westminster that preceded Brown v. Board, that was used as precedent in order for us to have Brown v. Board and have desegregation. And the reason that's important for me is because it talks about the solidarity that we have had for a very long time that we were not taught. And so that we were in this struggle of educational freedom and justice together, but we're not taught that because in many ways, I think that is some ways not wanted, because if we come together in solidarity in these very meaningful ways, we can disrupt the inequities that have persisted for centuries. And so these Heritage Months provide an opportunity for us to educate and to lean in, but it has to persist. It cannot only be in this 15th through 15th. And so that's where I have a little bit of dissonance in doing that, because I just think that African American history, Black history is American history and shouldn't be relegated to any particular month at all.
Especially only 28 days, man. So real quick, there's a question in a chat and it's anonymous, but it's a young person who said they grew up, essentially was told that they're Hispanic. That's what they rolled with. And so they're really appreciating this conversation right now. But the question is, okay, once you get this new kind of information or once you get tapped in, like, how do you go about trying to change something like the title of Hispanic Heritage Month, like outside of your own belief system? Again, that's a heavy question, but I'm just curious, are there thoughts about that? Or has there been work that you know of that you can share?
I think that there's opportunity within local government. I'm a, almost 20 years plus working both in local and state government. And I think that oftentimes we forget the power that exists within our backyard. And those are locally elected officials, whether that be your city council members or your county commissioners. And oftentimes they will pass resolutions that are acknowledging, whatever the focus of that particular month is, such as Hispanic Heritage Month. There are some jurisdictions that have chosen to use their other terminology, whether that be through staff advocacy or the elected officials themselves or community advocacy. But I think that that's a really great place to start. And then secondarily would be your school districts. Those are also elected boards that have influence in how these months are approached, what type of meaningful effort can be placed from a curriculum perspective, from a community engagement perspective, from a family perspective. And so I think that those are two really good avenues that are accessible to anyone within any community, is your local government and your school board.
Any other thoughts or comments there?
No, just that we have seen these types of changes happen. You see the renaming of, in the state of Columbus Day, to Indigenous Peoples Day, right? Recognizing the insidiousness of colonialism and how we recognize and celebrate that, and the need to kind of pivot away from that for very humanistic reasons. We see the renaming of Columbus Park from our dear colega on city council to La Raza Park. Like, these are things that are happening at the state and local level, recognizing the changing appetite for these types of things to change and to evolve, because we know that in some ways this continue to harm some communities, and we have to recognize and honor historical trauma and do everything we can to mitigate it. So these things are happening, but I think the question about renaming Hispanic Heritage Month, I'll just name some of the difficulty for us is, I don't use the term Hispanic. I generally will say, Latinx, Latina Heritage Month. And even that in and of itself, depending on the generation, someone like my father would be like, no, I'm not using that. It's inelegant. It's made up. And I tell him, Dad, all words are made up. You identify as Chicano, that's a made up word. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure where is your resistance coming from? And I challenge people who are resisting a generational ask where that's manifested. Because if it is in anti-trans or homophobia, like those are things that we have to do self-reflective work on, because terms, do evolve. And for me, I think it's important for us, and what's difficult for us is even as we're collecting data, and we need data in the state in terms of post-secondary data to match up with federal data, the federal data says Hispanic. If we change our data sets here in the state, we don't necessarily have a direct way of measuring how we are comparing to larger data sets because of what they use. So it creates almost a forced usage of the term. I'm on a Hispanic serving institution tour right now. I would not use the term Hispanic serving institution, but I have to because that's what it's called. And so I have to recognize that there are still terms that are used that I don't necessarily fully align with, but that are still part of the everyday nomenclature and way that we talk about certain things. And so it's difficult in many ways for me.
Yeah.
It's also to do with the media, Dr. Ross, because the media, any news story you hear about Latinos, as they refer to us as Hispanic. And so in the past, there's been movements like, remember when they used to say illegal aliens too? And then there was a push to eradicate that language. Right. And then it moved to undocumented individuals. And so I think that's another place, going back to the chat, the question, start with the media, start demanding that the media use more terms that you identify with.
And then there was another question. What about institutions who are saying, hey, we want to be more inclusive. We've got this diverse array of students from all over. We want to use terms that are more inclusive. We don't want to use Hispanic. We recognize that it can be offensive. What advice would you give to folks thinking about that in terms of serving their students or serving their community and wanting to not be offensive and wanting to celebrate and be inclusive? You got any thoughts on that?
I can see Roberto's chomping at the bit. No, okay.
If this was double Dutch, I'm gonna wait.
Okay.
And so for me, I've just, in terms of my career and just my personal trajectory, I have always worked within the immigrant community. And so these terms, while I fully advocate for ensuring that the terms that are used for our community are accurate and are humanizing and celebrate our distinct backgrounds and identities, I want to let folks know, especially the younger folks on this call, know that while we are advocating for terminology that best reflects who we are, don't forget who we're working for and who we are looking to advocate for and what goal we have in mind, because in terms of my professional experience and personal experience within immigrant community, specifically within Mexican immigrant communities, you go around and you ask, do you identify yourself as Latinx or Hispanic or whatever terminologies? And they're like, no, not really. These terms are not really what I'm focused on. What I'm focused on is the day-to-day. What I'm focused on is ensuring that I have access to dignified employment, the ability to provide for my family, et cetera. And so ensuring that while we're advocating for this terminology, to not get lost in just that effort, to ensure that we are constantly checking back with the community that we are working for and advocating with.
Yeah, novel thought, right? Ask people what they need and provide it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts there?
Well, I know I'm the introducer here, but can I jump in on some of these comments? Because I find it really riveting.
Absolutely, Dr. Thompson. What you got going?
Well, a couple of things. And one of them was, I heard you earlier say, even for the Black community, we have these different names, going back to, Negro, African-American, Black. And I think we spent too much time, or a lot of time, fighting amongst ourselves about what's the right thing to be called, and not fighting, I think, as Mariana just said, fighting for our quality of life and our standard of living and our access to opportunities. So I think sometimes, you know, these names get thrown out there and we jump in there and we start debating them and wrestling amongst ourselves as to what we're going to call ourselves, when really, a lot of, and not that it's not important, because it is very important, but I think we have to not take our eye off the ball of what our quality of life is that we're striving for, and for those who we're serving, and make sure that stays at our focus. And I share that also because, when I was at CNN, I was responsible for CNN Espanol, and we had US programming, and we were looking to produce Hispanic programming. And we said, well, what is that? And we started really taking a step back and saying, do we even know what that means, including the staff of the network. And we did a focus group, and we realized that this country didn't identify as Hispanic American. There were those in the West who were Mexican, they wanted Mexican-based programming. Those in the South, Miami was mostly Cuban. Up in New York was Puerto Rican and Dominican. And we realized there is no one else aside from us calling it Hispanic programming. No one else really knew what that meant or could tell us how to create one program that was relevant to the whole United States with all the different groups and their backgrounds. So I do think it's important that we do get these things right, or we speak up when we have an opportunity, because they do have an impact on how we're served, how we're seen, and how we're provided for.
Thank you for that. And I think that's an excellent transition to my next question, which really centers on allyship, right? Like, what does a good ally really look like? And I think for me, one of the things that frustrates me is when somebody says, I'm a good ally, and they're there because there's the protest, there's all the attention, it's the big rah-rah when I think anybody would show up. But what's behind the scenes, what's happening to Mariana's point in the day-to-day stuff, right? And so I just kind of want to get your thoughts around, like, what should allyship look like, and people who are interested in being allies, or just people who are in someone's life and they're just like, hey, I have a vested interest in who you are because I'm down with you, and so I want you to be okay, and that may mean I need to show up for you. So how do I do that? Let's come to Crestina and start on this one. For you, like, what does really good allyship look like?
It starts with a conversation. It really is checking in with someone to understand how you can support them. I'll give some professional examples. As somebody who is oftentimes the only woman of color in a room at a table, having a colleague who will intervene if they feel that the conversation is taking a direction. Sorry about that, multi-generational families. I think that
love it.
It's having those open, honest conversations, and also being willing to take action. I've had conversation with folks who I think intentions were good, but then were not able or willing to stand beside me or stand in front of me, or help support me when I needed that, when it came to larger forums with other colleagues. And so, I think for me, that's when I've been most disappointed in folks, is when the allyship has lacked action. And so for me, if you want to be a true ally, it cannot be in words. Oftentimes the most meaningful way is when you take action to support somebody that is from a historically underserved community, somebody who is the only woman, someone who is the only Latina, someone who may be in a different age range than the rest of the room, who may have a different, who may be disabled versus able-bodied, who may be LGBTQ+. There's so much dimensionality to all of us and what we bring to the table. And so ask and act is really what I would boil it down to being a good ally.
Yeah, your comments made me think of something that one of my uncles always tells me, and it actually has nothing to do with this work, but I think it is appropriate. He talks about, he needs an accomplice. You know, he's like, when I go do dirt, I need an accomplice. I don't need somebody who's just gonna stand there and whistle. I need you to come run with me. And so when I think about allyship, you know, I often find myself saying, you know, I don't know if I really want an ally. I think this concept of accomplice, and I've heard it in other places too, but I like that term. But Roberto, it looked like you had something.
I think Mariana did first. I'll go after
Oh,
Mariana.
okay. All right.
Oh, no, I only had a question for your question was from whom? I think this conversation seems to have centered around allyship, I'm assuming from white folks. But being
No,
able
I think anyone, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think anyone who lacks understanding of what your narrative is, but they want to be helpful, whether that be a system, whether it be white people, Black people, other people from your community who maybe grew up, you know, like I've got some friends who, you know, look just like me, but have no identity or no idea what my world is like because they grew up in a different world, right? Still love them, but they have no idea. And right. And so just kind of broadly speaking, like, that's what I mean. You know, I want to be general when I talk about allyship.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? Is like being explicit of what do we mean and who are we talking to when we're asking what allyship looks like, because it will look very different, the allyship that I'm asking for from white folks than from other BIPOC folks, right? And for me, it's that recognition when I talk about allyship from Black Indigenous folks. For me, it comes from a deep space of humility, acknowledging that the oppressive practices in our country were created and codified on the bodies and communities of Black and Indigenous peoples, right? And so acknowledging that that is where it started, and from that point is how it proliferated into our communities. And so for me, that allyship with Black and Indigenous communities as a Latinx is really coming from that deep space of humility and acknowledging that I mean, what we always say, our liberation is completely tied. And so it is that equality and that relationship that comes from that allyship, which is very separate from the allyship that I look for and request from white communities.
Okay.
Yeah. Man, I just love this group because absolutely we need to listen, we need to do. It's about humility. Dr. Ross, as you said, not all skin folk are kinfolk. And so we have folks who look like us who have internalized self-hatred, racism, all those things that really exist. And so allyship for me, I don't really like the term ally because a lot of folks will say they're an ally. In my mind, that's not something you can self-designate. It's something that someone like actually says about you, not something you should say about yourself. Because if you have a desire to be named ally, why? Like either you're about the work and you do it, or like without like wanting some sort of reward for doing that. So I actually move away from the term ally, and I like talking about solidarity. Like, what does that look like? What does it mean to be in solidarity with someone? Sometimes that means just shutting up, like using your ears proportional to your mouth, you know what I mean? And knowing when, you know, for me as a cisgendered heterosexual male, I have such incredible privilege. And there are many times if I want to be in solidarity with my non-binary, trans, queer folks, I need to not talk and I need to just listen and learn. And so to me, that's what it means to be in solidarity. That doesn't mean I'm an ally because I don't know what, again, what I'd rather do is just be in solidarity with folks and understand like, hey, do we need to get up and walk out of here? Let's do that. I will be in solidarity with you in that because what's happening here is not okay. You know, do you need me to say something? Do you need me to respond? Do you need me not? Like, to me, that to me is really, because that to what everyone else was saying speaks to the fact of you're not working, sometimes you're working on behalf, sometimes you're taking a step back, sometimes you're alongside, and sometimes it's just learning. And so I challenge folks who I guess I just problematize folks who are like, hey, I'm an ally. I need to be an ally. Like ask, like, where's that manifesting from and to what end?
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just touch really quickly on the thin line between appropriation and allyship? Because I see a lot of people who say they're allies, want to be allies, but really they're profiting off of our culture. through appropriation of our culture and by staking claim over the things that our work and our accomplishments, which is what we're supposed to be celebrating as part of this Heritage Month, right? So really acknowledging the way that I say you can be a good ally or good supporter or good co-conspirator, any of those words that we're using is take a look at your own implicit bias and how that is affecting your everyday decisions on who you support and how you interact, and really take a look at, am I appropriating or am I really providing support and being an ally? That's something that's really big for me, being in arts and culture. And I see a lot of people, mostly from the white community, who want to be part of something. And so they really just take a hold and grab a hold and just run, but it's like, that's not yours. So let it go and learn how to become an ally.
Can I just say too, an ally, I think, has to be someone who has more interest in helping you in solving your issues and problems than their own needs. And by that, I mean, sometimes people come in as allies and it's to check off a box, it's to appease their own guilt, to appease their own social program, to appease their own or propagate their own public relations, but they're not really aimed at the root of what you need and how you need it, and even the purpose and reason why you need it. So just this superficial friendship that they paint across, a group of people, and they don't really either know why, or they're not really sincere about getting to the root cause or the real hard work of really making a difference. So, I think our communities need to be real careful as to who we let in as allies, because sometimes they could set us backwards, or they could just waste a lot of time thinking we were going to get something done and we didn't.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, oh man, I want to have this conversation every month. I don't even want a new panel. I don't want a new guest. I just want this to be, we don't have to talk offline. We're going to have to just do this. I love this. We're getting ready to run out of time. And I always tell folks, the goal of these conversations isn't to answer every question you have, is to leave you feeling uncomfortable, to leave you questioning things, to leave you wanting to learn more, to figure out how to do more, as it relates to whatever it is we happen to be talking about, right? Like nothing gets totally done in an hour, but hopefully that the appetite to want to do more does. And with that being said, just want to give everybody an opportunity kind of for a final statement, and either a statement that you have, or if you would just kind of respond to what do you believe is, from your perspective, is most important for your community to thrive, what's needed, or a final thought that you have separate from that question. We'll start with Roberto here.
Well, again, thank you all for the invitation, and thank the panelists and all of you for sharing this space. It's a gift to be here with you all. Ultimately, I'll just say this, that our dije work, like diversity, inclusion, justice, equity, I call it dije porque ya te dije, like y'all should have known, all right, about this. So people say Jedi, but dije. But anytime we're doing dije work, and I say this a lot, it's less formulaic and it's more mosaic. We are artists. There's not one basic solution or basic equation that's going to get us to justice. As Mariana said, our liberation is inextricably bound together. But let's paint with the hues of humanity in this mosaic that we're doing. And if we do that, I believe we can, live up to the ideals that we so desperately cling to, but yet are so desperately failing to achieve.
Mariana?
I think along the same line as Roberto, it's that humanization piece. I think that's what we need as a community, is to be humanized. For me, I'm just really fixated on the one statistic, in that Latinas still only earn 57 cents to the white male dollar. And that is just a symptom, right? It's just a symptom to the root issue being that we're still not seen as equals. We're not seen as equally deserving for fair compensation of our labor. We're not seen as equally deserving to provide for our families or to live comfortably or happily. And so, yeah, that's my statement.
Okay. Rachel?
I just want to also reiterate, I think I said this earlier, but in order for us to step into our power as people of color in general, we really need to educate ourselves and on who we are, what our history is, and have that cultural pride so that we are not embarrassed or ashamed to be who we are, where we come from, and that all of our stories are valid and all of our stories are meaningful. So if you're seeking that and you're seeking your identity and trying to figure out, am I Hispanic, am I Latinx, whatever, go and find out your family's history and go and find out how you can be proud of all of your ancestors and all of the things that came before you.
Thank you. Crestina.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I always enjoy discussing, debating, and learning from my colleagues that are on this panel, and for giving us the opportunity to share with others. And I think that it really needs to begin with acknowledging that there's a need. I think that there are many people in this country who wouldn't accept the fact that there are different needs for different communities. And I think that it's important to understand that the needs are as diverse as our people's. We are from different countries, we have different histories, we have different lived experiences, we have some shared language, but we also have different religious beliefs, we have different dances, different music, different, there's so much dimensionality to our community, and there needs to be dimensionality to the response and the need of community. What my neighbors need in the San Luis Valley, in my town of 600, that is consistently and persistently ranked the poorest county in the state of Colorado, our needs are going to be very different than my neighbors in Denver down the street versus, folks that live in the inner cities in New York City versus any corner of our nation. The frontera that Mariana is talking about, the needs of that community are very different. And so I think we need to understand, acknowledge, and be willing and able to respond to diverse needs with diverse approaches and with true intention and community really driving what that discussion needs to look like. Because, you've heard 4 different perspectives here. You bring on 4 other folks that identify as Latino, Chicana, whatever term you use, you're going to have a different set of lived experiences and conversation and need. And so I think that that's important to remember, is the dimensionality of our community. And we need to continue having conversations like this so that we can better understand what those needs are and develop concrete, tangible solutions and outcomes for our people to be able to succeed and thrive.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we turn it over to Dr. Thompson for final thoughts and any announcements for Global Minded, I just want to take a moment to thank Global Minded for the platform, thank the Colorado Community College System for seeing that this work is so important that that I'm able to do it. And so I want to thank them and give a shout out to my boss, Chancellor Joe Garcia, for just allowing me to do the work in a way that I know how to do it. I want to thank you guys for being vulnerable and sharing this space and just enriching everybody's lives who were on this call. And I think just a couple of things that I would say people should think about taking away with them from this conversation. I think one is solidarity, understanding the importance of coming together to do the work for the right reasons, understanding people's narrative, what people are actually going through, taking the time to get to know people. And again, understanding that nothing we do is monolithic. It's not a monolith. There isn't, and sameness is actually awful. I think my life got better once I understood that, the world existed further than the 4 blocks that I radiated in for a long time around 36 and Elizabeth Street, right? Once I understood that there's other things out there and there's new information and new people, the world began to change. And so different is good. And the last thing I'll say is don't be afraid to end racial distancing. If everything that you guys are doing out there, for those of you who are with us today, if everything looks like you go to church, everybody looks like you go to grocery store, everybody looks like you go to the party on Friday night, everybody looks like you, consider switching it up. You might just mess around and have a good time. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Thompson with Global Minded. And I can't wait to have a conversation with you guys next month. We'll be talking to some sitting college presidents about their thoughts on the future of education. Dr. Thompson?
Thank you. And first of all, what a great panel, what a great discussion. I think this is something we could probably go on for another hour with the relevant topics and discussions and viewpoints and and just myself trying to stay out of it, just keeping myself from jumping in and commenting. So that's how I think engaging this was. So I think certainly a great panel that many of the participants should benefit from and really take away some good insight and some viewpoints. And some things that, as the title says, be comfortable with be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So, these are discussions that are not easy to have, or maybe we shy away from, but I think they're very much needed. And only when we have this kind of forum with certainly, with the esteemed panel that we have, which I thank every one of you guys for, being open and transparent and willing to speak on these kind of topics. Because it's important to address these. And when I see faces and voices like you addressing them, I think that makes that person who you don't know how you affect to give them the courage to speak out, or to give them the sense of initiative to want to get involved, to make a difference. So I think this is very important, and really thank you guys for that. And Global Minded can't be more grateful for what you do and making the time available for these relevant topics. So with that said, the only other announcement I have is just what we talked about earlier, was just making everyone aware that the November 4th Resolve to Solve conference at Georgia Tech is going to be a very important discussion. It's the first time that Global Minded has had a satellite event outside of Denver. So we're bringing the organization to other parts of the country so they can see and touch and feel the work that Global Minded does, the mission and values of what Global Minded wants to achieve, and to get them to be partners and committed to what we're trying to do as an organization. So the flyer that was up earlier will be sent out to those on the call, and hopefully, if you're able to attend or participate in some way, we certainly encourage you to do so. So with that said, we're grateful for today's conference, for today's event, and we look forward to next month's topic, which is always something that's engaging and challenging. And I know Dr. Ross will again push us to think beyond our comfort levels. So thank everyone for their attendance.
Right on. All right, everybody. Peace out. Y'all have a good week.
Take care.